Turning our pain into power, facing our vulnerabilities, shadow work, inner work, somatics, and what it really means to be innately worthy. I'm Pratna, and you're listening to Rebel with a Purpose. In today's episode, I've invited Kat Tovar, who is a shadow work coach and a somatics coach, and she's going to give us a lot more insights into what these topics mean. So, if you're ready to dive into a descent and then gain spiritual enlightenment, you're in the right place. So let's get right into it. Hi, Kat. How are you doing?
I'm so good, Prath. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to dive into the conversations with you today.
Yeah, same. I know. You and I were talking behind the scenes a little bit about topics of conversation. And yeah, I think my specialty is the sexy shadow and how trauma can be such a beautiful opportunity for growth and healing. So really important conversations that we're going to have here today. And yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I'm excited to learn more about you. So, to start off, could you please introduce yourself to all our listeners here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kat Tovar. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. Right now, if you're seeing these amazing certificates above my head, these are my mom's. I am sitting in her beautiful business office in Maryland because I am about to travel the world and yeah, do some inner healing and some spiritual pilgrimage work. So I am a women's group facilitator and trainer, and I've been, doing this work for a decade, over a decade now, I would say, of my own spiritual healing and self-development and growth. And then it really came into group facilitation in 2017, 2018, and it's been my life's work and my passion. And so, sometimes doing this deep transformational healing it can be a lot. And so right now I'm really looking forward to some introspection and some rest moving into the fall season as well. So yeah, absolutely love what I do. And I'm looking forward to welcoming more people in through this platform and through many others that I hold.
That's awesome. You said a decade, and I was like, wow, like 10 years of doing this work is amazing. What really inspired you to get into that?
Yeah, I would say college. When I moved abroad, I had the most expansive experience. I was studying my undergraduate degree in North Carolina in a small town that was really university centric. The town was pretty much there because of the university. And I moved to Seville or Sevilla, Spain,
Mm.
which was my first. I had traveled some internationally before, done some solo travel as well, but at 19, 20, moving abroad and experiencing true independence, independent from sororities and social circles, independent from old identities that this, past life that would have uh, bound you to, was really what inspired my spiritual curiosity and growth. And it was the first time that I truly felt freedom of location, freedom of time, um, freedom of relationship. And it expanded me in so many ways. And I, for the first time, felt alive. Going through your early childhood and adolescent years when you're so close to home and caregivers and these, like I mentioned, identities of social circles and people and experiences that that tell you who to be and how to be.
Mm-hmm.
To be away from that was so liberating, and I felt that expansiveness in my body and my spirit. And then what really woke me up was coming back. And I had this really intense reverse culture shock and really experience the polarity of freedom in my body and really experience that somatic experience of liberation to yeah, like this. I'm trying to think of what would be the opposite of freedom, like contraction, or not like jail, but really like,
Hmm.
yeah, just feeling restricted.
Yeah.
And so this really intense polarity of the two is what really propelled me onto my spiritual path. And for me, I'm not the type of person to have social anxiety. Like, I love people, I love experiencing new things, but for the first time I had social anxiety, and I was really
Hmm.
confronted with the feelings of not being enough, wanting to fit in, wanting to be accepted. And this was a visceral experience at the age of 20 that um yeah, I wouldn't have had if I hadn't experienced that really high as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that you bought in the comparison between, feeling expansive in your body, like not having rules, regulations to restrict yourself. And then you spoke about the other side of feeling restricted, coming back to the world and having that reverse culture shock and then dealing with, again, social anxiety, which normally you wouldn't have. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're different. That's your uniqueness. That's your spiritual inclination. So I want to ask you, like, have you ever had a spiritual awakening? Would you
Oh,
say?
girl. Have I had, I feel like I've had five at
Oh my
least. Yes.
God. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, definitely.
how do you know that it is a spiritual awakening?
I would say it's yeah, a pretty intense emotional purge or initiation that happens. So for women, what I like to call it is often like going into the descent. And so women, we experience this, and men probably do too, but I'm a woman, so I'll speak to our collective experience as a woman. But we go into the descent, which is what I call like the shadow, the void, the underworld. And you start to embody and get curious and experience parts of yourself that you've never known before. So for me in this case, yeah, I would say I've probably had at least, five spiritual awakenings that I can remember. And in this case, when I speak about returning from Spain, I started to feel social anxiety and depression like I've never known. And so that was kind of my first initiation. And then I realized, God and God consciousness through that experience, which was a really enlightening and really expansive time in my life. And then I've had a few more. One, being out in the jungles in Costa Rica, which is where I lived for a number of years, in an isolated town of 200 people, laying on the floor after a yoga practice, being totally overcome with joy and bliss after a really shadowy time of self-doubt and self-abandonment. And then my last spiritual awakening, I had to even ask some friends because I was like, I thought I've already had my spiritual awakening. Like, what is this? Is this
Mhm.
another one? And they're like, I got the reflection back, like, you can have as many as your spirit needs to become awake, And so there's no quantifiable amount of spiritual awakenings that I believe one will have. But the last one was pretty intense. This was um yeah, I don't know if it was my most intense one. I've had a couple of pretty intense ones. But the last one that I'll speak into is an experience back in early February. Just days before my awakening really happened, I was at a party, and it was a facilitated party. It was a beautiful party all around Eros and connection. It was around the Valentine's Day, February 14th here in the States. And I realized what it means to be innately worthy. And for me, this was something that I was really challenged with in my life. Like, what does it mean to be innately worthy? I was listening to the
Mhm.
podcast, I was doing the trainings around worthiness, and I just didn't for me, being a Westerner and growing up in the States, like your worthiness is associated with your job title, with the amount of money that you have in the bank, with your relationship status, with your graduate, like how many degrees you have.
Mhm.
And so for me, my worthiness was always measured up on some things outside of me. And so to realize what it means to be innately worthy just because I'm here and because I exist was a pretty expansive and
Yeah.
yeah, like a coming home moment for
Mhm.
me. And then 5 days later, through a result of self-abandonment and prioritizing somebody else's needs, after I'd had this really intense upgrade, spiritual upgrade, I went blind. I lost my vision. And so I get ocular migraines pretty much only when I'm on medicine, when I'm in ceremony. And I got I got a really bad ocular migraine and I was completely sober. I was on the road. I was in Utah. I was far away from home and I couldn't see for 5 days. And that was my last spiritual awakening, my most recent one that um yeah, just it shook me, it rocked me, it brought me to my knees. I had to reevaluate a lot of my relationships, mostly my relationships to substances and my relationship to my body. Throughout this period, I've been celibate since February, which has felt really good. And this losing my vision was because I was abandoning myself and my body and I wasn't communicating my needs. And so, spirit and my body was like, great, if you don't want to look at the truth, then I'll take your vision away. And yeah, so I've been in a pretty deep portal of spiritual initiations and healing this year, and I'm actually about to complete a 10-day Vipassana, so I'm sure I'll have another awakening when I'm on the Vipassana. But yeah, I've had a few.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Where are you doing the Vipassana? Is it in Rishikesh?
It's in Sri
In
Lanka.
Sri
Yeah.
Lanka. Okay,
Yeah.
that's amazing. You know, it's so funny how you spoke about being innately worthy. I was going crazy with that topic a few weeks ago, actually. Because even being in the East, I like how we have both perspectives on the podcast. You're from the West, I'm Indian, so from the East. We have always learned to attach our worth to our grades growing up in school because it's so competitive, and then to a job, and then to our money and the salary and the kind of cars we have and the social status. So all of those things, right? The whole concept of innately worthy came up to me because in my offers, I was attaching myself to the outcome of getting clients and my worth to the outcome of getting clients. So I was really debating on this topic of being innately worthy. And that's why I'm curious to ask you, how did you start believing into it, like we are innately worthy? That it's a very spiritual concept of understanding that you're worthy, whether you do or achieve anything in life, regardless of that, you are worthy. How do
Yeah.
you have faith in that? How do you start believing in that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And what I'll say is, and I'll really get into my own experience, but the process is really an embodied process. And so for me, I really started to understand and believe in the frequency of worthiness because I felt it at a somatic level in my body at a cellular level. And now it goes from like heady, I know I'm innately worthy, down into the body, and it kind of like integrates and it becomes wisdom. And so that's what I like to call like knowledge versus wisdom. Knowledge is in the head, wisdom is in the heart. And so, yeah, during this party that I was at, to be completely honest about the party, it was a play party, and so it was like sexy, kinky, and I was in this really sexy room. There was a facilitator that was facilitating BDSM, and there was like spectators, and so it was all people had their clothes on, their lingerie on at least. And so this guy, I was sitting there in awe, just like watching him work with these people because I mean, to explore human consciousness in this way, it's just such a curious thing. And he was like, all right, who's next? And I was like, I need to go up there. Like, I know I felt really called. Like, there was something that I needed to get, and there was a reason that I was there, and I was just called. And so I was I raised my hand. And so he invited me up to his table, and he had this mitten, like this glove, and it was rabbit fur. And he asked me what I was working on. And I said, worthiness. I would love to, like, that's my thing right now. I'm trying to understand worthiness. And so he said, okay, we talked about boundaries and consent. And then I started to receive his work. It was mostly like energy work, like sexy sort of energy work. But he, with his mitt, was like rubbing my body. And I have a jaguar tattoo on the back of my arm. And he asked me about the jaguar and what does the jaguar have to do with worthiness? And I said, well, the jaguar doesn't question her worth. She knows her worth.
Mm.
She walks through the jungle with confidence, um, knowing, who she is. It's in, like, it comes from within. She's the queen of the jungle.
Mm.
And there's never been a shadow of doubt. Like, the jaguar that is who she is. And he goes, well, what about the other tattoos on your body? What do they have to do with worthiness? And I said, and at this point, I was super relaxed. I was kind of in this hypnotic state. I was definitely accessing more of the subconscious. And I responded, the other tattoos are worthy of being on my body because they are, just because they are, because they're there, they get to be there.
Mm.
And that was really when I understood what it means to be innately worthy, is because it's here, because my watch is
Mm.
on my wrist, it's worthy of being on my wrist, because these earrings are on my ears, they're worthy of being there, because I'm here sitting in this chair breathing, I'm worthy of being here.
Mm.
When it's my time to transcend, to transform, from human to ethereal, then that will happen. But because we are existing, because we are on this physical plane, we are allowed, we are worthy of being here. And so, the chair doesn't ask if it's worthy of being here, it just is.
Mm.
Right. And so why would it be any different than me? Right. We're all matter. And that was really when I understood what it means to be worthy, is because I am, because
Mm.
I'm here. Because if I wasn't here, then wouldn't, if I wasn't worthy of being here, then I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
That's so beautifully explained. Thank you so much. Like that really like was a aha moment for me. And I want to ask you about, shadow work. More about what is shadow work and how did you in your personal journey, if you could like, give us examples of move from, feeling abandoned or shame to now feeling self-love or confidence, and what was your journey like and what kind of shadow work did you have to do if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it was maybe 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really stepping into my role as a facilitator. Somebody mentioned to me that I used to work with, she was like, you don't do real shadow work. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't understand what she meant when she said that. I was like, of course I do shadow work. What are you talking about? And I hadn't really met my shadow at that point. I had like gotten to know parts of it, but I hadn't really gone into the descent, right? That's what I called it earlier, the descent, the underworld. And I would say, yeah, shadow work is like really going into the unknown. It's also, I associate it with even the subconscious. So going past your conscious mind into the subconscious, which accounts for over 95% of your thoughts, values, beliefs, and identity. It's all in the shadows. And the shadow is also quite feminine in nature. So your subconscious is quite feminine, it's shadowy, it's more emotional.
Mm-hmm.
It's what isn't, you can't be seen by the light. And so when you think about the shadows, I think about the moon as well. this really feminine aspect of life. And for me, like, my gift is traversing the shadows, going into the dark and illuminating it from within. And what really brought me into this work viscerally again, like with wisdom, embodied wisdom, was a really traumatic experience that I had in 2022. It was the beginning of 2022. 2021, I had gotten into a relationship. I knew that this man that I was with wasn't a forever man, but I felt like there was energetically some like karmic thing that I had to explore there. And I got into this relationship, and the first night, it was so poetic and sweet, but also like horribly traumatic at the same time. The first night that we said, I love you to each other, we were giving each other Christmas gifts. You know, I had been off birth control for 6 months, and that night we conceived. And that moment, that soul spirit entered into me, in my third eye, I saw a flash of light. And that was like the shadow, right? That was going into the void, going into the darkness, going into the unknown, the portal that we carry as women deep within us in our wombs, and illuminating from within. And so that's kind of like, that was my initiation really into shadow work, was getting pregnant by a man that I should have not been pregnant by and with. And here in the United States, we have access to medical terminations, abortions, and it was about 15 or 20 days later that I pursued that, because I knew it wasn't my path to have a child, and I was working for the government at the time. And it was the most painful time I'd ever experienced in my life. You know, I thought about a couple of spiritual awakenings. My vision thing was kind of painful. This loss was the most painful thing I've ever known in this lifetime. And the level of grief, the level of shame and guilt that I had to walk myself through was unparalleled. And, you know, as women, we have, I mean, we go through life, death and rebirth cycles so many times. And so this was a period of death. And it was in the deepest, darkest days of winter, too. It was January 2022 that I was entering into this death portal. And I walked through those days alone, horrified, scared. I didn't know. I would wake up in the middle of the night bawling, crying, like from my dreams. I would just wake up, and I remember I was like, would get up out of my bed, walking around, just heaving, bawling, crying, grieving this loss of who I, you know, of my spirit baby, but also of a past version of me that I was needing to let go of, because whoever was there that allowed this to happen she was dead. She was no longer. And so I was grieving a lot of emotional and physical trauma that I was moving through. And um, the work that I do in kind of that time period in my life, I was studying quantum energetics. I am a master certified practitioner of NLP. NLP is like subconscious reprogramming. And within the program, we were studying quantum energetics, which is like a total belief and surrender into the law of polarity and cause and effect, of like, the deeper that you let yourself go, you will only ever experience the equal and opposite. So like, the more surrender into the shadow, the more I let myself just go there and let go of control, the more I'll experience that love and that joy and that connection and that peace on the other side, because I let myself know that darkness. And so I really let myself know the darkness, because I was like, law of polarity, you know, cause and effect, I'll only ever get to experience pleasure like I've never known before. And it was probably 3 or 4 months of really, 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 yeah, January through April, I would say, early May, that I was in a deep grief period. And yeah, I just surrendered to it, knowing that my time will come and my joy will come. And finally, in time with the seasons, I started to come out of my shadow. I started to come out of that death portal into a rebirth, right? And so I get like the phoenix rising from the ashes. That's kind of the visualization that I'm like feeling right now, and I have in my heart is like I burnt it all down. You know, the old me, she's dead. She's in ashes, and now there's this beautiful like phoenix that's rising. And yeah, is that, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, that was beautiful. Like, thank you so much for sharing your story, firstly. And it's just so brave of you to, allow yourself to let go of control, to surrender to your shadows. How do you do that? Like, for someone who is scared to do that, what would
Yeah.
you advise them? Like, how would they need, like, what would the steps need to be to just surrender to the shadow, or to feel more comfortable being out of control?
Yeah. I would say your breath is like
Mm.
number one tool and resource to come back to. I mentioned earlier, like I've sat in some medicine ceremonies, and number one is just like your breath. If you have your breath, that breath, prana, is life, right? And I know that you know that too, is breath is life force. And so just always coming back to your breath, and the depth of your breath is what really it determines the depth of the life that you'll experience, because prana is life force. And so the deeper, more enriching, slower breaths that you'll get to take is equates to the deeper, more enriching life that you live. And so always coming back to the breath as your number one tool, and to ground and to deepen into this work. Like, you've got you. I think another piece of, yeah, just mantra reminder would be that you've lived 100% of your hardest days, and you've been here with yourself since the beginning. Only you have walked through every single hardship, every single challenge that you've ever lived, and you will continue to walk through the shadows and walk through the void. And yeah, you've got you. You've got you. Only you know yourself the way that you do. Nobody else can tell you, right? And so to keep that as a reminder too, that uh yeah, that you've survived every single one of your hardest days, and that you'll continue to until it's your time. And that's a reminder too, is like you'll continue to have these lessons, these upgrades, these spiritual learnings and awakenings until it's your time, right? Until you've learned all the lessons that you're here to learn, and you transcend, you leave this body in this earthly plane. So I would say with that, like lean in, because the resistance is what creates disease. The resistance is what creates dysfunction in your life. And I would say too, what's coming to mind right now as an entrepreneur, because we face this shit every single day.
Mm.
We got to face it. And my sister, like I mentioned, I was working for the government, and the government's got, in the United States, it's like, that's the creme de la creme. I mean, you're either working for a bank making, $500,000 a year, or like tech sales, or you got a stable government job that you make 130K a year, whatever it is. But you have pension, you have benefits, you have this and you have that. And my family was so resistant to me leaving that security to go into the unknown. But I said I would die a unhappy woman not fulfilling my life's purpose. And that's not to say that I'm choosing the easy path. The easy path would be the path that's already made for me. Right
Mm.
now, I'm like walking through the freaking jungle with a machete and my eyes closed. I don't know that there's a freaking, tiger behind me. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think to honor your path and walk your unique path is that's your liberation work. And so, yeah, relating that back to the shadow, it's like, well, you could take the easy route. And who knows, maybe that's like the route that's meant for you, totally. But for me, like, I'm supposed to do hard shit and I'm supposed to help other people do hard shit too. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And how did you discover, I like to use the word remember your purpose? How did you know?
Oh, how did I remember my purpose? It was, I started to, yeah, like I mentioned, become awake when I was about 20. I didn't want to live a normal life. Like I've never really been super normal. And when it was time to think about what I would be doing with my future, sitting in an office never really excited me. Working for other people never really excited me. I've always had this creative spirit, really passionate spirit and soul. And so when it was time to get a job, I didn't. I started to volunteer and work for a nonprofit and I moved to Central America. And so going to Central America and doing things different than what society had expected, that started to be a remembrance of like, okay, this is what I'm here to do. And then I found yoga and I found my breath and started to cultivate better, mind body connection and awareness and really a somatic experience. And so I was always attracted to alternative healing and holistic modalities and medicines. And when I was living in Costa Rica, I became ill with what we'd found out was celiac disease. I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And through my disease, I found holistic health and coaching and really wanted to heal my body. And so every single time that I've invested or gotten curious about a program or a path has been because I've needed it first. And so it's for whoever's listening, like if you're wanting to find your path, discover your passion, your purpose, it's like, well, what do you need? And that way you can lead much more authentically and embodied in the work that you're helping others to discover as well, as like, what's your medicine, and that's, I actually invite a lot of people into my space through a what's your medicine strategy session, because it's like, well, what is alive for you? What is the pill that you need to swallow? What is the magic that's waiting to be discovered within yourself? And yeah, that's kind of where I invite people into, is discovering your medicine. What's your medicine? But yeah, it's typically like, what do you need for yourself? What's alive and true for you? Maybe is there something that you're avoiding? Like, what would that big dream be? For me, a friend of mine, he makes these incredible hats and he's passionate about music, and that's kind of his like shadow career, because he totally wants to pursue music. But it's like so vulnerable for him, right? And so what's that thing that you're desiring to share but feels really tender and scary, and what's really vulnerable for you is probably what's most real and true.
Mhm. Yeah, which is why it's not always the easy path, right? And I
Yeah.
just I just love that you explained it like that. And I love the term what's your medicine? That's beautiful. And you spoke about somatic experience. So what is somatic experience?
Yeah, for me, a somatic experience, it's so feminine in nature because it is in the body. And so anything related to the body is feminine, but it's like really energetically processing emotion going into a grief ritual, going into rage, going into joy and pleasure, but it's really an embodied experience. So you're not in your head. For me, a great exercise that's really helped is like dance. Ecstatic dance has really been a somatic experience for me, is going to these sober dance parties and noticing when I'm in my head and when I'm getting, "Ugh, somebody's judging me," versus just moving and being, in the body. And so, yeah, somatic experience can be emotional alchemy process, which is like a lot of maybe like transforming rage into pleasure, rapture, um, or transforming grief to love, right?
Mhm.
And really like letting your body process whatever that underlying emotion is, so
Yeah.
that it's like a clearing process, right? So you feel into that emotion fully, because somatic is related to emotion. Emotion is energy in motion. Energy is in the body, it's stored in the body. The emotion's stored in the body. And so activating these emotions um, for liberation and for freedom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And I believe in the whole emotion is energy in motion, and I really love that. And I've done ecstatic dancing once this year in Tallinn in Estonia. And I just remember how I was so filled with this whole judgment, and everyone around me was just going wild with their dance moves. And I was like, there's so much shame around just being weird and wacko and wild in public. And there's so much shame that's just stuck, in your root chakra. And I was like, it's time to just be me and liberate that. And the more you do it, the more accepting you are and the more love you generate in your body. So yeah, I really love that you shared that. And now, since we're coming towards the end of our episode, could you please share with us what kind of work you do with your clients and how you can invite people into your offer, into
Yeah,
your world?
absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been so fun to be here, and your questions have been so just like it's been gold. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Um, yeah, so my Instagram is I am Kat Tovar. I'm sure you'll probably link it in the show notes, but that's the easiest way to find me. And a few of the offers that I've got going on right now. So I support and facilitate women's groups and gatherings. I've got a few free virtual offerings that are happening from October through the end of the year. The next one is October 20th. It's just a women's gathering online. And the beginning of next year, we'll be starting what will be a multi-month women's group program that is like a women's group. Essentially, we'll be meeting virtually every 2 weeks. There's also going to be a retreat as part of it. So all of the women will get to come together in person and really do more of like somatic healing, energetic activation work, trauma healing. You'll get to come apart as we hold it together for you in collective and group. And then I also teach women how to facilitate these types of circles. So that's my Illume Leadership Academy. That's a year-long certification program, and you get everything. You become the most transformational facilitator in your community, in your world. If you're curious about creating these transformational spaces for others, going deep. I know there's some other women's group facilitator certifications, but they only scratch the surface. And so really this work is a lot of somatic healing, a lot of channeling, a lot of tuning into your own intuition, into your own guides. And so that's really what the work that it happens inside of the academy is, women really tuning into their own channel, into their guides, into their higher consciousness through bringing themselves through the initiations of the work itself. So yeah, that's kind of my main areas. Illume is enrolling right now. I've got a few spots left through the end of the year. And I'm so excited to welcome in and get to know your community. And it's been such a pleasure. I would say if anything resonated from today's episode, please send me a message. I love hearing from you guys. It means the world. and also share this work. Like, you've got an amazing platform, Prath, and it's really important that other people hear the stories and receive your work and your medicine in the world. So share, and yeah, there's no shortage of abundance here. So I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much, Kat. And your offers sound absolutely amazing. I'm definitely going to ask you some more questions on that in the DMs. But thank you so much for your time and for your energy being here. You've really provided so much wisdom and knowledge to us. Hope you have an amazing week ahead, and I'll catch you soon.
Okay, thanks, love.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. Well, that was the end of this episode, and wasn't it super enlightening? I loved that she shared her personal stories, and it was so brave of her to do that on here. So I'm extremely grateful, and I hope you had major takeaways from this episode. You're listening to Rebel with a Purpose, and I'm Pratna, signing off.